and this is a great point you make in the book, is that some of the major components of inflation, there's nothing that the central banks can do about it. And yet they're the ones that are telling us that we got you, we're going to protect you, we're going to jack up these rates to slow down this economy, to drop the inflation, when I think even normal people think that doesn't sound right. And again,
I remember I was in a cab in New York City, going to New York City from JFK when they had raised rates for the first time, the Fed, in March of this year. And this cab driver, he's driving me in, and we're chatting, and he's kind of like, oh, what do you do? And I say, I'm an economist. And normally that just stops the conversation, right? I mean, that just like no one, like
cocktail
what?
Parties,
like I'm just going to fall asleep. Yeah, no. And usually I almost think I'm saying that because it's like I just had this long flight, I just want to get to my hotel, whatever. But he literally turns around while we're driving into the city. He turns around and he's like, you tell me this. How is whatever they're doing up there, referring to Washington, the Fed, whatever he was hearing, how is them raising the cost of my mortgage helping me? I don't get it. And at the time, when we talked about inflation rising later on in the year, gas prices were already creeping up. It's just the Fed didn't particularly notice, and they called inflation transitory. And then all of a sudden, now, they're like, inflation is real, and we can do something about it, even though, again, we can't do anything about fuel prices or about food. And so real people are impacted by these central banks trying to reverse the sort of artificial effect of what they did along the way and along these years, but in a way that hurts real people as opposed to helps them. And why should they be allowed to even say, and I'm speaking specifically about Jerome Powell here, you might feel a little pain while we do this. We don't elect these people. No one gets to vote for the head of the Federal Reserve or the head of the European Central Bank or the head of the Bank of England. They're just like there. Yet what they do has such a real impact and an outsized impact on the negative side for real people, and doesn't help them on the positive side, i.e. really in fighting inflation. But ultimately still provides a very large cushion to the financial industry.
Right. And so just to kind of finish up on inflation, what should have been done, and why did this seem to sneak up on us from out of nowhere? Because we weren't talking about inflation last year, and then in the last 4 to 6 months, it's what everyone's talking about now. Headline news. I do feel like the public is better educated now about a lot of things now, monetary policy, this kind of thing. But what should they have done, or what should have been done sooner to stop this from happening?
Well, when the Fed and other central banks created such a just deluge of fabricated money in the wake of the pandemic, and they connected it, and governments connected it, and headlines connected it to this idea of helping the economy, that was very much a just misconception that was just perpetuated, right? I mean, yes, putting some money into the system, allowing banks to continue to potentially make loans because certain businesses needed them because they had to be closed through no fault of their own. Yes, there was certainly some help in that. But not to the extent of these central banks effectively manufacturing out of nowhere more money in a few months than they had basically in all of their existence in such a short period of time at that moment. Yes, the pandemic was big. Yes, shutting down economies was horrible for many people. And yes, we could talk all day long about, sort of the health-related aspects of all of that. But on the economic side, that's what happened. And so what they should have done, again, is not create so much. Not promote the narrative that they were doing anything to help the real economy, because even then they weren't. I mean, yes, governments were creating fiscal stimulus. There was checks going out in the UK, in the US, and so forth, and that could have helped people or companies sort of get through. But the central banks weren't really the ones helping them. And so that was a problem. The other problem was they had no exit plan. There was no clear communication that said, we're going to dump trillions of dollars somehow into the markets, through debt, whatever, to help. But we don't know how long it's going to be there. We don't have any sort of strategy as to just something where we can dial it back before there is a real crisis. There was no conversation then, having learned after the financial crisis of 2008 that there was no exit plan then. So just this idea to sort of turn on financial spigots created this distortion between the market zooming up and ordinary people being left behind, even in the wake of economies being shut down. So that was wrong. The other thing was, even in the situation now with inflation, and not too long ago they considered inflation transitory. And then all of a sudden what happened, I think, was that gas prices were up by so much. And that's a very sort of politically harsh thing for officials that get elected to actually deal with. And all of a sudden, it's like, look, you guys got to do something about this. CPI, the basic consumer price inflation figures and the similar inflations throughout the world in terms of how they're computed, all of these numbers are going up. All these numbers are going higher. How can you guys just not notice this? And aren't you supposed to be the arbiters of price stability? Do something. And all of the central banks, besides the People's Bank of China, who've just ignored all of this, and they're continuing to sort of float their economy and try to come out of a low growth situation, and are continuing to close places and reopen and close and reopen. With the exception of that large central bank, they've all just sort of fallen into line. Even the European Central Bank recently, with raising rates by 75 basis points to fight inflation. So again, what's wrong in that? You are basically saying that you're fighting an inflation that you can't beat. Because you can't change my electricity bill. Right. Yet you're saying you can. You can't really change how much I can afford in sort of my basket of groceries each week. But somehow you're saying that you're going to keep on fighting inflation until you can. So I think the biggest problem with central banks, not even worrying about what monetary policy literally is, but just even in the narrative, just even in the fact that they're in the headlines, that we're having this conversation, the biggest problem is that they're lying about what they can do, and they're hurting people in the process when markets go up, when markets come back down, because ultimately they can no longer affect the real economy like they maybe thought they could have decades ago.
Hey, it's Brian Rose, founder of the DeFi Academy. I've told you my 4-week crypto bootcamp is amazing, but don't take my word for it. This is what my students are saying.
The DeFi Academy was an amazing experience for me. It took me totally out of my comfort zone.
In this course, I was challenged, I was held accountable, and pushed to do things that honestly weren't always easy.
It's been phenomenal, and I can't believe we're already up on our 4 weeks. It has flown by.
Going through this DeFi accelerator by far was one of the best courses I've taken.
You do this course, you really get into the nitty-gritty of the activities that will make you comfortable with decentralized finance.
Thank you so much to Brian and everyone at London Real and the DeFi Academy for even putting together an amazing course like this.
Anybody else that wants to do it, please sign up. It is well worth the money.